Okay guys, we are gonna react to the best normal type Pokemon video from Wolfie VGZ. Um, I'm honestly quite interested in what we can expect. I am sure there's like Regigigas, Slaking, something like that, and some more crazy Pokemon in this video, but we shall see. I'm quite interested to see.
Of Pokemon is filled with so many incredible, fantastical creatures, from dragons to fairies to even bugs. But some Pokemon, they aren't actually so incredible, they're just very normal. And that got me thinking, what is the best normal type Pokemon ever made? Now, I've done a few videos in this series, but for those of you who are watching this one as the first one, keep in mind that I am only talking about competitive Pokemon here, official competitive Pokemon at that. And so that's the lens that I'm going to be kind of choosing the Pokemon for this video. So if your favorite normal type isn't on here, doesn't mean it's bad, it just means that it's bad in the official competitive format, or not the best.
I'm looking for a cap, chat.
Full of surprises for me. I kind of felt like normal type.
I got one there.
That many great Pokemon, right? But actually, there's a fair few. Though the first Pokemon on our list was a bit of a surprise to me. But
Ursaluna.
Checking the results, really thinking about it, I feel like I have no choice but to include our number 8 best normal type, Eevee. Eevee probably seems like a Pokemon that you would put in a list like this as a joke, but actually competitively, it is undoubtedly one of the best normal types ever. And that's because in Pokemon
Z move? Yeah.
Now, I can't show you
It's an omnibus, right?
For copyright, thank you for that, Pikachu. But basically, for those of you who didn't play Sun and Moon, Z moves were special moves that would transform a regular move into something greater. In Eevee's case, the move was Extreme Evo Boost, and what it did was give Eevee a +2 boost in 5 of its 6 stats. Every stat that can get a boost except for HP, okay, and technically accuracy and evasion, but those are kind of separate. All the regular stats, you know what I mean? Anyway, Eevee got a move that could literally double all of its stats, and it was also the only Pokemon
double omni boost. Okay, that's sick.
Just as a refresher, there were some Z moves that all Pokemon could use, which were, you know, Normalium Z, Grassium Z, Firium Z. Okay, let's move on. And then there were signature Z moves that could only be used by certain Pokemon holding the special Z crystal and also using a certain move. So in Eevee's case, if you held Evium Z and used the move Last Resort, it would transform into Extreme Evo Boost, which again is incredibly powerful. Because Eevee was the only Pokemon that could use this move, it was the only Pokemon that was viable with the strategy. The strategy was actually pretty strong. Basically, you would use support Pokemon to protect the Eevee so it could use Extreme Evo
Kartana. It's been a long time I've seen him.
Baton Pass, which would basically switch Eevee out into another Pokemon, but keep all of the stat boost that Eevee had earned. So basically passing doubling stats to whatever you wanted, and that was extremely dangerous if it doesn't appear obvious. On top of that, it wasn't even mandatory that you use Baton Pass to get the stat boost on another Pokemon. You could also use the move Psych Up, which just copies all the stat changes of the partner. So you could do stuff like Psych Up Espeon with stored power, which does more damage based on how many stat boosts you have. That's
really nasty.
Like that you Baton Passed into, which also does more damage based on how many stat boosts you have. Yeah, like basically people would run the move Haze and Roar kind of just to deal with this Eevee strategy, and it actually did really well, like ultimately winning a major tournament back in Sun and Moon. It is worth noting that Eevee was really only ever good when it could use this signature Z move. It didn't seem obviously outside.
Seems fair.
But it was very strong. It was a totally valid strategy, like I said, and I mean it was basically around for quite a while in the early years of Sun and Moon, and Eevee was the only Pokemon who could pull it off. It was also a totally unique strategy, right? Like we never really saw set up Baton Pass in competitive Pokemon other than with Eevee. Like I'm sure there were a couple exceptions to that, but like for the most part, Eevee was probably the most dominant any. Like,
that's interesting though, since there's a lot of good setup moves.
Definitely like warrants a spot, although it is
like
down on the
Quiver Dance.
Pokemon of all time.
I mean, Chill Smash
is just like Eevee, a Pokemon that has only been good for one generation. Though that's because it's only been out for one generation. It's Ursaluna. And for the sake of this video, I'm going to group both Ursaluna here together. Because
like I said, Ursaluna.
Like, it would be weird to have one higher than the other.
Seems fair.
I'm just going to put them both together. Ursaluna is the evolved form of Ursaring. I actually don't know if that's true for Blood Moon Ursaluna. It might actually be counted differently. But regardless, it's an incredibly powerful normal and ground type Pokemon. The two Ursaluna, they have some things in common, like the typing, but they otherwise play very differently. So I'm going to talk about them as
one is physical, other one is special.
Let's get this out of the way. the only reason that these Pokemon aren't higher up is that they have not been out for very long. Ursaluna only became legal in the competitive format as of basically last August, and Ursaluna Blood Moon only became legal as of this past fall when it was released in the DLC. If this video were made like a couple years later, I think I definitely would justify putting these Pokemon higher up depending on how they continue to do. But at the moment, I feel like they haven't been out long enough, so I can't justify putting them any higher, but they're already so strong that I also need to include them on this list somewhere.
Porygon 2 will be the number one. It must be. It must be.
But they also have had some success.
Not gonna lie.
As well by being trained to be really
B2 is
fast,
so incredible good.
Your team's speed stats, basically allowing them to outspeed Pokemon that they otherwise would have no business moving before. Ursaluna regular for me is a physical attacker, and it's really strong because it has a combination of a bunch of different offensive tools. The big one is that it has the ability Guts. Guts gives it a 50% power boost whenever.
And it's actually pretty bulky though. Not gonna lie.
Always the burn
only special, but
the flame orb item. Normally, burn would cut your attack stat in half, but in Ursaluna's case, because of the Guts ability, it doesn't cut it in half and instead makes it 50% stronger. There's also combos with its move Facade, which is a 70 base power move, which doubles in power, becoming very close to like Hyper Beam or Giga Impact if the user is affected by the status condition. And that's not even factoring in the additional status boost from Guts. Basically, it's a 210 base power move factoring in Guts, and that's not factoring in like same type attack bonus or Helping Hand or Swords Dance or anything like that. It's very, very powerful. It's so powerful it can even like come close to KOing even resisted hits, which is just completely nuts. On top of that, Ursaluna's ground typing is very valuable. It hits the rock type and steel type Pokemon.
Felt laggy, but
resist
it wasn't, I guess.
Pokemon that are immune to normal, so they have actually surprisingly good synergy there. And with its ground typing, it can use a couple different ground type moves. Earthquake is kind of an obvious one because it hits both opponents, and Ursaluna is so powerful thanks to Guts and its incredible stats, which I haven't even talked about yet, which I guess I'll talk about in a second. But also, you don't even need to use Earthquake if you don't want to hit your partner. You can also use the new move Headlong Rush, which does immense amounts of damage. It's basically ground type close combat, and it's significantly stronger than Earthquake, and so having both options is really nice. I should talk about Ursaluna's stats. So the physical one is incredibly tanky and very strong and pretty slow. So it's nice because it works very well as a Trick Room sweeper. We actually saw it most recently win the largest Pokemon tournament of all time in Europe, used by Nils Dunlop, paired alongside Porygon 2 to help set up Trick Room, and then Ursaluna would just KO everything. It also is really threatening because, like, obviously Guts powers it up, but it also means you can't slow it down with a burn, which you can do for other physical attackers, or Spore, which you can do for all Pokemon that can be affected by Spore, because the burn protects it from being affected by different status conditions. Ursaluna also benefits a lot, I think is worth mentioning, from Terrestrialization. It is weak to fighting type moves, and as is the case with a lot of Trick Room Pokemon, it really doesn't want to get slowed down when it's in Trick Room. Like, you only have a couple turns, so you need to make use of them. And so if it weren't for Terrestrialization, I think Fake Out would actually be a really reliable counter to, well, not a counter, but it'd be a good tool to slow down Ursaluna. But it can actually run Terra Ghost to become immune to Fake Out and immune to the fighting type attacks that would otherwise hit for super effective damage. And yeah, like it's basically a real problem when you can't fake it out and can't stop it from getting value out of its Trick Room turns. Let's talk about Ursaluna Blood Moon, because there's some similarities, but it also
I love this guy more.
Now, Ursaluna Blood Moon has a different ability than Ursaluna, which makes sense because Guts only works on the physical attack stats, and this ability is just really, really, really broken. It's kind of a combination of two different abilities, the
Scrappy
Eye ability, kind of, and then like the ability Scrappy. It's got differences in both of them, but basically Mind's Eye, which is its ability, I didn't actually explicitly say that, though I'm sure the editor put it on screen, so you probably didn't need me to say that. But anyway, Ursaluna Blood Moon's ability, Mind's Eye, allows it to hit Ghost-type Pokemon with normal and fighting-type moves when they would otherwise be immune to it, which is extremely threatening, as well as the fact that it basically makes it so Ursaluna Blood Moon's accuracy cannot be lowered, and it doesn't care about evasion boosts on the opponent. This ability would already make Ursaluna Blood Moon very threatening because, unlike regular Ursaluna, like, you can basically play around regular Ursaluna if you're really smart, because there are types that are immune to both of its moves, right? Like, let's say I have Flutter Mane and like Tornadus, right? And I'm like, okay, well, my opponent wants to go for Facade into my Tornadus. I can switch to Flutter Mane, and then it's like, okay, well, they want to use like Headlong Rush against my Flutter Mane. Let me switch back to Tornadus. Like, you can kind of outplay it if you're really good. You can't really do that for Ursaluna Blood Moon because of the ability. You can't use Ghost type Pokemon to resist its normal type attack.
Love this animation.
And if you want to use a Steel or a Rock type Pokemon,
come on, that was so
attacks, those are weak to ground
sick. Not gonna lie.
Earth Power, which is a no drawback move that is very spammable. As if all this weren't bad enough, Ursaluna Blood Moon also gets a signature attack called Blood Moon, which is basically just a better Hyper Beam. It's 140 base power. Now, keep in mind, any move above like 90 or 95 base power typically has a very real drawback, whether it's a lot of recoil damage, lowering some of your stats, really bad accuracy. Blood Moon's drawback is just that the user can't click the move 2 turns in a row, which compared to all the regular drawbacks is
It's
way
insane.
more reasonable. Like, this really isn't that big of a drawback. You just like have to keep it in mind a little bit, I guess, when you're using it, but like you're not like weakening yourself, you're not chancing a miss. Like it's actually very, very, very manageable. And when you pair this with like Terra Normal for a damage boost, Life Orb for a damage boost, Helping Hand, it's by far one of the single strongest attacks in the game. Just like Ursaluna regular for me, Ursaluna Blood Moon for me has a spread move that is very clickable.
For
it's
me.
Hyper Voice, which is a spread normal type move, which is just very powerful. It's very reliable, and unlike Earthquake,
So
it
good.
does not hit your partner.
So good.
Yeah, Ursaluna Blood Moon is currently, I would say,
This
thought to be a bit
Pokemon,
better
not
than
gonna
Ursaluna
lie, I
regular,
love it.
especially because
I love
as a
the Blood
special
Moon.
attacker, Ursaluna Blood Moon isn't affected by like Intimidate or anything, but both of them are incredibly strong. Despite the fact that neither has been out for even a year yet, they each
I don't
have
like
major tournament wins, and yeah, they just look to be some of the strongest Pokemon.
I don't like the regular Ursaluna. I prefer the Blood Moon Ursaluna. It's so incredible good. I don't know. I love the Blood Moon way more, since there's a lot of good physical mons in Scarlet Violet and less special. So I prefer Blood Moon Ursaluna way more.
On that have been added in Scarlet and Violet, and so I think they definitely deserve a place on this list. And the only question is, should they be higher up? And I think eventually the answer will be yes, but right now I feel like this is a fair placement for them because they don't have as many results as the Pokemon above them, but they have been out for far shorter a duration. Coming in at number 6, this is one of my favorite Pokemon that was added in Scarlet and Violet. Farigiraf is cool because it isn't flashy in the same way a lot of the other Pokemon on this list are. Like, it doesn't have the stats of Ursaluna or Ursaluna. It doesn't have like a signature move like Eevee. In fact, the thing that makes it unique is, although technically a signature ability,
Blocks
like,
priority moves.
Several other abilities, but that is its ability Armor Tail. Armor Tail is really great because it stops all priority moves from working against the user's team.
It's so good.
That's a really big deal in competitive Pokemon because priority moves are everywhere between Fake Out, Grassy Glide, Thunderclap, Sucker Punch, Aqua Jet, like Taunt from Tornadus, like, or any prankster Pokemon. There are so many priority moves that kind of form the bedrock of competitive Pokemon.
In the new regulation, in Regulation H, there's like only Fake Out and Grassy Glide, really much. There is less Taunt, for what I've seen at least. There's at least many players using Taunt. I can believe that really well, but I haven't seen really a Taunt yet.
Pokemon, and when Farigiraf is on the field, I mean, your whole team is immune to them. Normal and Psychic typing also like offer some unique benefits where normally normal type Pokemon are weak to fighting type attacks, but with Psychic you are neutral to them and you can actually hit opposing fighting type Pokemon for super effective damage. Psychic type Pokemon are typically like weak to ghost type attacks, but normal makes you immune to them. So while it isn't like perfect synergy or anything, each type kind of complements each other in a nice way. Farigiraf is primarily used as a Trick Room Pokemon, but what I think is interesting is that whether it's an offensive Trick Room Pokemon or like a supporting defensive Trick Room Pokemon varies depending on the player and the team. I would say the more popular way of using Farigiraf is to focus on more of those kind of like defensive team supporting attributes. You can keep Farigiraf alive for longer if you invest more in its like defenses, and it's actually really good as a supporting Pokemon because not only does it have Trick Room, it can also use Imprison to stop opposing Trick Room teams, even if you don't want to set it up yourself. And it often uses Helping Hand as well to boost its partner's damage output, which allows it to function inside of Trick Room, but also be a good Pokemon outside of Trick Room because you can pair it with a really strong attacker that's fast and just use Helping Hand and not have to worry about any priority moves dealing with the faster attacker. But the thing about Farigiraf is it actually has a very respectable special attack stat, and so my personal favorite way of using Farigiraf is actually more priority moves dealing with the faster attacker. But the thing about Farigiraf is it actually has
It has 110 special attack. I thought it was like 90 and 70, 80s defense, special defense, but it's higher. Okay.
It has a very respectable special attack stat, and
It's
so my
it's
personal
really
favorite way of using
respectable.
Farigiraf is actually more as an offensive Pokemon. Just like Ursaluna Blood Moon, it can use Hyper Voice as a normal type, which hits both Pokemon, though it's notably weaker when Farigiraf uses it. But the nice thing about Hyper Voice is you can use it to activate your
Throat spray.
item, the Throat Spray, which gives Farigiraf a special attack boost after it uses any sound type move. Hyper Voice, unsurprisingly, is a sound type move. After being boosted by Throat Spray, Farigiraf actually can do a respectable amount of damage, and although it often isn't picking up one-hit KOs, it's actually a very valuable Trick Room attacker because you can't slow it down with Fake Out, and it's consistently outputting like decent
chip
amounts of damage
damage.
with like boosted Hyper Voice or boosted Psychic, and so if you pair it with other bulky Pokemon
I mean,
like Rillaboom or Incineroar or other
that
Pokemon
ain't
as well, you can actually use
chip
it as
damage
kind of
anymore.
a Trick Room setter that also works as a support Pokemon outside of Trick Room that also can actually be a sweeper inside of Trick Room. It's a very interesting Pokemon that doesn't play a lot like other Pokemon that we've had that set Trick Room up. In its debut season, Farigiraf had a couple good performances and actually got second at the World Championships, almost taking home the whole thing. What I think is neat about it is that sometimes Pokemon that do well, especially early on in a generation, they tend to struggle a bit more as the power level increases, right? Like stronger Pokemon get added, and that makes like the Pokemon that we thought were good like slightly harder to use, right? Like there's a lot of Pokemon that really struggle once Incineroar becomes legal in a metagame because it just like invalidates so much. Farigiraf is actually really cool in that it scales kind of with the power level because the stronger its partners are, the more value you get out of Armor Tail protecting them from these priority moves. And so at the first regional of the most recent format, Farigiraf actually won the whole thing supporting a Miraidon. It was really cool because it actually used Terra Ground, which is not a common Terra type on Farigiraf or any Pokemon, to become immune to the partner choice spec Miraidon's discharge. So what you
that's
can do is
sick. That's sick.
Boosted, choice spec
A Psycho.
Electric Terrain boosted,
That's sick.
boosted, same type attack bonus boosted, discharge
Psycho.
Farigiraf, and your opponent can
That's
use
sick.
Fake Out or any priority moves to stop.
Oh,
Miraidon,
what
and
the
then you
fuck?
just output a ton of damage. So yeah, I think it'll be really interesting as we kind of go into these later forms.
Wait, the Among Us tanked it so incredible good. Wait, can I show you guys? I don't know if you saw it or not, but
Boosted, Electric Terrain boosted, Hadron Engine boosted, same type attack bonus
look,
boosted,
look.
discharge paired with Farigiraf, and your opponent couldn't use Fake.
Oh, you can't see. Oh, my bad. But look at that. He eats. There's mushroom.
To stop Miraidon, and then you would just output a ton of damage. So yeah, I think it'll be really interesting as we kind of
It's
go into
insane.
these later formats
What the
where
fuck?
stronger legendary restricted Pokemon are allowed, and seeing how well Farigiraf keeps up. Also, quick question: how do you feel about subscribing? In all seriousness, this is my full-time job, and so if you're enjoying the content, it's a really good.
There
way
we
to
go.
support
There
me
we go,
and help me
Wolfie.
make more of these videos.
Got you.
Also, it helps you all out because if
Got
you
you,
like this
brother.
video, which God, I hope so. We worked really hard on it. It'll make it more likely for YouTube to show you future videos, and you know I do hope to do one of every type. So,
Not gonna lie, the editors just went nuts on this. Sir, you cooked. You really cooked. I ain't gonna lie. You really cooked. Oh. Okay.
if you want to see more of these videos, or you're just like want to support the current channel, or you want to see other types of videos that I do, it's free, it's easy, it just takes one click, and it helps me out a lot. So yeah, I know that like people might find these kind of sub plugs, you know, a little annoying, but I really appreciate you all having grace with me as I try and figure out
you're
how
good.
to actually be
You're
a
good.
YouTuber as a career. Coming in at number 5 is another Pokemon with the same typing as Farigiraf, Indeedee. Indeedee is also a more recent addition to the list.
Okay, yeah, fair.
It's been around
Size
for a bit
spam.
longer, and it's incredibly strong. There are two
Size
Indeedees
spam.
technically,
Okay.
because Indeedee is one of the few Pokemon that has different stat distribution and a different move pool depending on the gender. So we're talking exclusively about Indeedee female here, which is the more supportive one. Indeedee male is the more offensive one, and it's not as good. Indeedee female is incredible because of its move pool and its ability as well, I should say. Indeedee female is incredible because while they both share the same ability, Psychic Surge, which is one of the best abilities in the game, especially now that Tapu Lele hasn't been in the game for a while. But what really sets Indeedee female apart is the fact that it's bulkier and its move pool is just incredible. Indeedee female is one of the best Follow Me users in the game. Follow Me is by far one of the best supporting moves in the game. It's a big part of why Pachirisu won Worlds in 2014. It's a big part of why Ogerpon is so strong right now, why Togekiss dominated Pokemon in early 2020. It's just an incredible move because it turns out being able to use the defenses of a support Pokemon to support a more offensive Pokemon is very unbalanced in a
What is this
game like
quality? Not gonna
where
lie.
there are two Pokemon on the field.
Is it just recorded over random footage? Or just downloaded it or something? It's not a raw footage, I guess, because it seems so off. I don't know.
They're interacting with each other in fluid ways. So Follow Me is generally very good, but Indeedee is an especially good user because of its Psychic Surge ability, which sets up the Psychic Terrain, which, just like Farigiraf, turns off priority moves. So one of the ways around Follow Me is to use Fake Out into one Pokemon and then attack with another. Urshifu is a really good way to kind of combo this, where you Fake Out the Follow Me user and use Urshifu to go after the Pokemon that you actually want to hit, even if they use Protect. But there are other ways of punishing this as well. Fake Out can also be used to stop the Follow Me user for a turn if the partner Pokemon can't protect for other reasons, like it's holding a choice item, or I don't know, like there's just protected last turn. It's a very valuable tool, and with Indeedee's Psychic Surge, Fake Out doesn't really work. Indeedee also gets the move Helping Hand, which can be used to support Pokemon to do even more damage, which lets it kind of contribute to a battle offensively, even in the situations where, yeah, like it isn't necessarily like
what's damage roll?
Follow Me. In Scarlet and Violet, Indeedee received a major buff that I think was unintentional. I think it was due to a bug where, like I said, the Indeedees have different move pools, right? And the male Indeedee could not learn Follow Me. It was overall viewed as a lot worse, but they gave it Trick Room to kind of compensate for the fact that it couldn't use Follow Me. They were like, okay, Indeedee female, you're too strong, you get Follow Me. Indeedee male, you can get the really good support move Trick Room, right? Well, due to, I think it was a bug in Scarlet and Violet, Indeedee female could learn Trick Room, but only if you caught it in certain max raid dens. Like, there were certain raid boss Indeedees that were able to use Trick Room, Indeedee females, I should say, that were able to use Trick Room when they wouldn't otherwise be able to use it. And after, like, it was out for a little bit, the game developers just, like, were like, okay, we kind of messed up, so Indeedee female, now you can also learn Trick Room just normally. Like, you got it. Like, our bad. Like, we messed up, and the way we're gonna kind of like fix it, because what are you gonna do? People caught Indeedee female with Trick Room, and then you're gonna say, okay, those Indeedees are like not allowed anymore. It was like not really something that they wanted to do, I guess. And so they just said, okay, Indeedee, you can actually use Trick Room now. So a huge buff to one of the best Pokemon out of Sword and Shield. Indeedee is another Pokemon that kind of scales with the power level. Because same with this Farigiraf, like being able to use Follow Me becomes Pokemon valuable when the Pokemon you're supporting are even more powerful. That's it. Also enables a lot of offensive strategies. Like the most obvious one is the move Expanding Force, which is a Psychic type move that becomes much stronger if the Psychic Terrain is active. It switches from being a single target move to hitting both your opponent's Pokemon, and so that's a lot of damage. Style of play, normally called Psy Spam, which typically are built around these really strong Psychic type attackers, and either using Trick Room to set them up and try and sweep with Pokemon like Hatterene and Armarouge, or alternatively using an out of Trick Room strategy with Iron Crown as the most recent addition to overwhelm the opponent. You can also use Caloric Shadow with this strategy. So yeah, if you thought dealing with just Astro Barrage was a pain, now you might also have to deal with a second spread move while supported by Follow Me and Helping Hand. White guard. White guard. Because it has been out for longer, and also because it has like some counterplay built in, because a lot of its like value is built around the fact that it does set up the Psychic Terrain. Opposing terrain Pokemon like Rillaboom, mostly Rillaboom right now though, if we ever get Tapu Koko back, and actually Miraidon, we have Miraidon now as well. I should say that. And actually, technically, Terrapagos, when it terastallizes to Stellar, removes Psychic Terrain. So basically, if the terrain goes down and Indeedee doesn't become better than a Pokemon like Clefairy or Ogerpon or most other Follow Me users, even Amoonguss has a case to be better than it, though it's not like that strong a case as just a pure redirector. And so because it has like more built-in counterplay, Indeedee feels fair in a way that the next Pokemon on our list doesn't. Coming in at the number 4 slot, it is, I think, my least favorite Pokemon of all time, Smeargle. Smeargle is just a menace, and it actually single-handedly ruined most of an entire year of competitive Pokemon just on its own. For those of you who don't know, Smeargle has a unique gimmick that it can learn every single move in the game permanently. There are other ways for a Pokemon to temporarily use a move that it couldn't normally learn, like Me First or Copycat or Mimic. But in Smeargle's case, it doesn't need to use any of those moves because it can just permanently sketch any move that it wants. And you might think, okay, well, like maybe it can just learn one move that it doesn't normally learn. But the thing is, because Sketch permanently transforms into whatever move it sees, you can then relearn it because Smeargle learns if you level up. So yeah, Smeargle can learn every single move in the game, and it can choose 4 of those to use at a time. Although its stats are just abysmal, it's able to kind of compensate for that because it can use the Focus Sash item to allow it to survive a single hit anyway, and it's mostly here as a disruptive support Pokemon, so like not having good offensive stats doesn't really matter. To make matters worse, Smeargle has the Moody ability, which will raise one of its stats by 2 stages and lower a different one by 1 stage at the end of every single turn. So if you ignore Smeargle for too long, it can build up a lot of stat boost and become a huge menace. Smeargle basically took over. It does. It was able to sketch Darkrai's signature move, Dark Void. This move is only 80% accurate, or was only 80% accurate. Smeargle got it nerfed actually, but it puts both opponents' Pokemon to sleep. And as you can imagine, that's not very fair or balanced. Sleep could potentially knock a Pokemon out for 3 turns. So you could potentially hit a Pokemon with Dark Void and then have them fall asleep. Players Cup 2, Scarlet Violet. I really know I got my max turn sleep every single fucking time.
It ain't funny anymore. It was really disappointing to see, but the Smeargle is broken.
For 3 turns each and yeah, like win the game on that one move alone. With the focus sash, it was really hard to knock out Smeargle, and by putting a Pokemon to sleep, they weren't attacking, and so you gave yourself chances for Moody to raise your stats even more, and often a single evasion boost or a single speed boost would make Smeargle basically impossible to deal with. It was also really difficult to kind of like handle Smeargle because again, it could learn every move in the game. Where you're dealing with like fake out follow me Smeargle, where you're dealing with a wide guard Smeargle. There was a move called Crafty Shield, which I imagine that most of you don't know what it does, but it stops all non-damaging moves from hitting the side. It's Klefki's signature move. I don't even know if it's still in the game, but Smeargle would use it too sometimes. And the problem was back in 2016 when Smeargle took over, that was a year where we were allowed to have 2 different restricted Pokemon on a team. And so the power level was so high and the value of putting one of your opponent's restricted Pokemon or Mega Evolution to sleep was just so insane that yeah, like it was really difficult to deal with Smeargle. Oftentimes Smeargle would be led with a way to protect it, like, you know, with fake out Mega Kangaskhan, and so oftentimes you would try to protect against Smeargle turn 1 to deal with the fake out pressure, and then they would just get a Moody boost, double their speed, and then you would lose the game if they hit Dark Void. Now it is worth noting that back in the day, Smeargle's Moody ability was stronger than it currently is. It used to be able to raise both accuracy and evasion stats, which getting either one was a big deal because then Dark Void would never help you raise accuracy, and you could miss your moves against it if it got an evasion boost, so it was really dangerous. Since 2016, I mean, the developers saw that Smeargle was so clearly out of line that they nerfed Dark Void to be only 50% accurate. They removed Smeargle's ability to learn Dark Void. It's one of the only moves in the games that it cannot learn. And they changed Moody to no longer interact with accuracy or evasion, and so it became a lot easier to handle Smeargle in theory. But that didn't stop Smeargle from taking over the next time they restricted Pokemon in 2019. It turns out having the ultimate support Pokemon that can still put your opponents to sleep with, initially it was Spore, but then people started running Lovely Kiss to get around Grass type's immunity and Safety Goggles immunity, which was very stupid. But yeah, supporting really powerful Pokemon with Smeargle like Xerneas or Mega Rayquaza or Lunala or Primal Groudon, like it still was a very good supporting Pokemon. It's funny because if you just look at its stats and its abilities, like you might think it's not that big a deal, but yeah, Smeargle was a complete menace. It is worth noting that Smeargle hasn't been so good. I don't even know if it was in Sword and Shield, but I don't really remember it ever doing anything, and it just recently got added to Scarlet and Violet. It did finish in the semifinals of one of the more recent tournaments, so we have to watch out for it, and they did just add restricted Pokemon back into the game, so it's possible for Smeargle to make another resurgence.
I haven't seen them.
Undoubtedly one of the best normal type Pokemon of all time.
Not
and
even
I
once.
it's never good again because when Smeargle is good, it's very bad. Okay, before we get to the top 3, I wanted to talk about some honorable mentions. There are actually a lot of really cool normal types, and so I wanted to talk about some of these here, even if they're not like the best of all time, just because I think they're really neat. Starting off, let's talk about Chansey. Chansey kind of always pops up as this super degenerate strategy, which is built around making Chansey completely unkillable. Normally, the way it works is you have Chansey as the centerpiece. You want to use moves like Minimize to raise your evasion, sometimes Defense Curl to raise your defense. You basically compensate for the fact that Chansey is very, like, not very bulky on the physical side, but very bulky on the special side and the HP side by using a move called Guard Split, which averages out your defense stat and the defense stat of whatever you hit. So these strategies would often use Shuckle or Carbink, Pokemon with the high base defense stat. The fact that Chansey's Eviolite item allows it to become 50% bulkier. They would use like Guard Split on their own Chansey, make themselves super tanky, and then use like Toxic and Seismic Toss to gradually like deal with the opponent after they set up Minimize, making them almost impossible to hit. With Chansey's like huge defense stat now after you've Guard Splitted it, and also impressive special defense stat, it takes like several hits to get rid of it. Chansey can heal itself. Yeah, like it basically was just impossible to deal with. It like never won a major tournament, but it was always a strategy people had to be aware of, and it definitely made a lot of people very angry online. Next up is Ditto. Ditto is another Pokemon that kind of like Smeargle tends to shine really in
I love Ditto.
We have these powerful legendaries because normally in a restricted format, you're restricted to using 1 or 2 special powerful legendary Pokemon on your team, and Ditto has a good way around that, and that it can kind of steal the opponent's legendary Pokemon. I think that Ditto is one of the hardest Pokemon ever to play. In fact, I've only really brought it to 1 tournament, and I don't think I was actually that good with it because it's just very, very, very hard to use. Ditto's ability Imposter allows it to transform into a Pokemon on the opponent's side, but the thing is, which Pokemon it transforms into depends on like what is directly across from it. So if your opponent has Kyogre and Incineroar, you can't switch Ditto into the slot across from Incineroar because it will go down, and so that makes building game plans with it really difficult, and it also means you have to be thinking about something else where you normally wouldn't have to think about, which is like which side are my Pokemon on, right? It's not just what Pokemon do I want to bring in next? Because if you have Ditto in the back, you also have to think about which Pokemon am I transforming into. Because of how hard it is to use, it's a Pokemon that doesn't always see a ton of success, but for the players who are really good with it and who really believe in it, they're able to bring out a lot of its potential because having an additional restricted Pokemon on your team is a really big deal. Ditto also has something special about it, which is that when you transform into a Pokemon, you copy their stat boosts as well, so it can be really good against Pokemon that boost their stats. The most obvious one is Xerneas. Xerneas obviously doubles its speed, special attack, and special defense stats, and Ditto can copy that, almost always holds the Choice Scarf item, and then you have a faster setup Pokemon. It was also used a little bit to try and counter Zacian, where Zacian basically, its ability Intrepid Sword gives it
Oh, Swords Dance.
send out Ditto, turn into Zacian, and you'd already have the +1 boost from Zacian's Intrepid Sword. But Intrepid Sword activated Sword and Shield every time Zacian was sent out, and so Ditto would then activate Intrepid Sword again because that counted as like sending Zacian out basically. So you could have +2 attack Zacian compared to your opponent's +1 attack Zacian. It's really difficult to use Ditto, like just unbelievably hard. So it's not a Pokemon that sees a ton of play, and I didn't think it was worth including on this list, though I thought about it over Eevee. But it's such a cool Pokemon with such a and it's so unique and special, and nothing else really does like what Ditto does, that I wanted to include it. Next up, I want to talk about Porygon Z. Porygon Z is interesting. It was really at its best during the Sword and Shield and mostly Sun and Moon eras, especially the first year of Sun and Moon. Porygon Z was quite good. Porygon Z was a menace with Z moves. It was one of the strongest attackers because it has like obviously Hyper Beam, which is really strong, but it also has the adaptability ability, which makes all its normal type moves even stronger, which is really scary. And so
Not gonna lie, PC can be even insane with Scarlet Violet. I think adaptability with Terra, it should work and boost Terra Blast and keeps normal type snap. Adaptability boost.
Would often like set up Trick Room and you would just lose, or you could try and attack it like with a faster Pokemon, it would be Choice Scarf and you would lose, or you would try and tank it like and it would use, you know, Choice Specs and you would lose, or Z move and you would lose. What was really cool about Porygon Z though, and my favorite set, was actually Z conversion. So you would use Normalium Z conversion, which would give Porygon Z a +1 boost in all of the stats and would change its type. And so basically, it would often turn into, I think it was electric or ice, depending on the team, with Thunderbolt and Ice Beam. And so Porygon Z with +1 in every single stat would actually be very tanky. It was very difficult to deal with. You would build the whole team kind of around supporting it, and you would change your type.
So
I think it
cold.
was normally electric that you
Sorry,
would turn
chat,
into,
but
and
it's really cold.
Thunderbolt, which was not only getting boosted by the special attack boost, it was also now getting boosted by adaptability because now you're an electric type Pokemon. This set was used by my good friend Marcus. I think it was originally popularized in Japan, and he almost won the North American International Championships back in 2017, and it was just such a cool team that I wanted to mention it here. Porygon Z is not that tanky, but with Dynamax, it was able to really stick around. And not only did Dynamax Hyper Beam
Terra Ice
do immense amounts of damage, but it also lowered the speed stats of both.
in the new snow
so it allowed Porygon
with
Z to be this attacker
Aurora Fill.
And it could also just like output so much damage and
I think it can be really bulky.
It didn't like hold up so well once the power level increased, but initially at the start of Sword and Shield, it was a really scary Pokemon. Last but not least in our honorable mentions, I want to talk about Regigigas. Regigigas is one of my favorite Pokemon. I actually brought it to a regional back in 2012 and finished 2nd place with it, and it wasn't as an attacker. It was like the most annoying support Pokemon of all time. Regigigas is surprisingly bulky, and so I would use like Thunder Wave, Confuse Ray, Rock Slide to try and stop the opponent from moving, and then I also had Wide Guard because it didn't learn Protect back in the day. I don't know if it gets Protect now, actually. I think it doesn't, but maybe. Anyway, I would use it as this horrible support Pokemon, which just torment my opponents. And
I've used Regigigas.
Really somewhere if I asked Aaron Zeng to battle me, and I think Regigigas
I think it does,
for like
yeah.
4 or 5 or 6 turns. It's very funny to me, not to him. But the real Regigigas set is the one that took off during Sword and Shield when they introduced Weezing's neutralizing gas ability, which turns off all abilities while Regigigas is on the field. This set actually saw a ton of success towards the middle of Sword and Shield because Dynamax Regigigas.
Why is my quality dropping?
Same as Porygon Z, it would lower the opponent's stats, and you couldn't use any abilities to slow it down. So no like Intimidate, you couldn't use Prankster to get a speed advantage, you couldn't use Unseen Fist, or really anything because Weezing was slowing like your entire team down when it came to their abilities, and Weezing was also disrupting with moves like Will-O-Wisp and Taunt. Regigigas has incredible coverage. A lot of normal type Pokemon have really good coverage, and so it would be able to output so much damage on so many different types. Like you could often run 4 attack Regigigas with like Giga Impact, Thunder Punch, High Horsepower, Ice Punch, and it was just really difficult to deal with. I actually ended up playing against one in the grand finals of the Players Cup 2, and it was really difficult to handle. Like I had to make a lot of really precise calls in order to somehow handle it. Anyway, because it was only really good in that one like brief time in Sword and Shield, I left it off of the best of all time list, but I think it definitely deserves an honorable mention. And like Dynamax was really good to Regigigas. It's not so good with Terrestrialization, but I think it'd be cool if there were a time in the future where like Regigigas Weezing could come back. Maybe not quite as strong as it was during Dynamax like era, but maybe it would still be usable, and that could be cool. Anyway, with the honorable mentions out of the way, let's talk about the 3 best normal type Pokemon of all time. Starting with Porygon 2.
Oh,
unlike Porygon Z,
okay.
which plays as this fast
B2 second
like,
of third place. I thought it would have been higher.
Plays completely differently. Because Porygon 2 is
Who will be
able
higher?
to hold the Eviolite item, which actually
Mega Gengaskan?
defenses to great levels. It actually functions primarily
Yeah,
as
Mega Gengaskan.
that it's not so similar to Farigiraf, where Farigiraf has a lot of utility out of Trick Room. Porygon 2's main value is that not only is it super difficult to remove, and not only does it take advantage of Normal's defensive attributes, which is that although it doesn't have a single resistance, it also only has a single weakness, and so it's really like hard to get normal type Pokemon off the field. The Porygon 2 actually has the move Recover, which can heal half of its maximum HP. So if you're just kind of trying to gradually whittle it down, which would work against Pokemon like Farigiraf or Indeedee, doesn't work against Porygon 2 because it can heal all the way back up to full HP. Porygon 2 also has 2 very good abilities. There's Trace, which turns into a random ability on the opponent's side, which can have really high impact. Like if you Trace Intimidate, it can have big value. If you trace like, I don't know, Water Absorb against like Water Ogerpon, that can have a lot of value. There's a lot of really good abilities for Porygon 2 to trace, and if you get a good one, it can potentially swing a game in your favor. The other ability that I would say is a little more popular is Download, which gives Porygon 2 either an attack or special attack boost, depending on whether the total defense or total special defense of the opponent is higher when Porygon 2 switches in, where it gives you the boost that the opponent is weaker to. So if both their Pokemon added together have lower special defense, then you get a special attack boost, and if they have lower physical defense, then you have a physical attack boost. Porygon 2 mostly serves as a bulky Trick Room setter, like I said, which is here to support the team, but with Download potentially giving it a boost, it's very dangerous to ignore, especially because in its move pool, it has a couple threatening things. It often runs Ice Beam to hit grass and ground type Pokemon for super effective damage, and I feel like there's always some Pokemon that are just quadruple weak to ice, which is nice to pressure with Ice Beam. And then in the other slot, Porygon 2 sometimes ran like Tri Attack, which is very dangerous because it had a chance to freeze or burn or paralyzed. So that's what would run Toxic though, where if you would try to ignore Porygon 2 and just say, okay, like I'm gonna have a
Toxic
team and I'm not gonna care about Ice Beam or Tri Attack or whatever, Porygon 2 would start running Toxic and say, all right, well, like you got to deal with me soon. Your Pokemon are going to run out of HP fast, bucko. In more recent formats, Porygon 2, it still runs Trick Room, Recover, and normally Ice Beam, but now it started running Terra Blast, which is really strong. Normal type Pokemon are great users of Terra Blast because you get the same type attack bonus both before and after you Terrestrialize, and you can kind of like get a third move coverage out of only 2 attacking moves, which is just really, really valuable. Terra Blast is also nice because if Porygon 2 uses Download and gets an attack boost and then Terrestrializes, Terra Blast turns into either a physical or special move depending on which is stronger, and so with an attack boost you can actually end up having Porygon 2 work as a mixed attacker, and if you lose that attack boost then you go back to being a pure special attacker, so it's kind of like a neat little trick you can do. When Sun and Moon first released, Porygon 2 was up there as one of the top 2 or 3 best Pokemon. It was on nearly every team and it won a ridiculous amount of events in that format.
Okay.
And since Sun and Moon, like, yeah, it was one of the best Pokemon in that first year of 2017 when Sun and Moon first released, but it's been a consistent and great Pokemon ever since then. It's been used by players in almost every single competitive format, even after 2017, even when there's other good Pokemon like Cresselia and Farigiraf, and actually most recently it won the biggest official Pokemon tournament of all time alongside Ursaluna as the Trick Room setter for Ursaluna, using double normal type Pokemon to win the largest Pokemon tournament ever, excuse me, which I think is pretty neat. To me, Porygon 2 is kind of like the ultimate defensive support normal type. We've seen a lot of supporting normal types on this team, but the fact that it's so bulky, it has multiple good abilities, and it's just so difficult to remove and supports this team with Trick Room and can gradually whittle down the opponent. It's a really, really good, consistent, reliable Pokemon, and it's a Pokemon I'm sure we'll be seeing more of in the future. Okay, we're into the top
Hell yeah.
two, and I actually went back and forth on these for quite a while.
Yeah,
I really
okay.
wasn't sure which one I was going to put at number 2 and
Zacian
number 1.
and
So
Insane Roar.
the exact ordering of these two. Just know that
IZ.
like this is what I ultimately decided on, but if you disagree, I actually think there's a case to be made for the other order as well. The number 2 best normal type Pokemon of all time is Snorlax, and this is actually pretty controversial because you could argue that Snorlax is the number 1 best normal type of all time. It's won 3 different world championships, which you can't say about the number 1 slot on our list, but we'll get to that in a second. Let's talk about what makes Snorlax special. First, its stats. It is remarkably tanky. Like, it has a huge HP stat, and both its defenses are good.
True.
Special defense
That's true.
Especially good. Like I said, as a normal type, it doesn't have that many resistances, but it also only has a single weakness. So for moves that are kind of like above average strong to average strong,
But it's nowadays was
just because it's so
actually
tanky.
bad.
It actually kind of works in its favor because it's so
Back in the
slow,
day, it was really good.
Attacker, where if you get Trick Room up, Snorlax is
If you ask me.
on the field, and that allows it to move first when the dimensions are twisted. It has multiple good abilities. Immunity prevents it from getting poisoned, and Thick Pack gives it a resistance to fire and ice type moves. Both are very valuable. Gluttony we'll talk about a little later because we'll get to it. Just we'll get to it in a second. Give me a minute. Snorlax wouldn't be that strong in a vacuum if you just look at its attack stat. Like, yeah, it's good, but it's not great. So maybe like it's a little surprising if you don't know about Snorlax to see it this high up because it doesn't look like it should be able to do that much damage. But what makes Snorlax really special is
Gumshoes 110 attack. Okay.
+6 attack boost, which is the highest
Gumshoes
of attack boost.
thingy.
Technically, that's wrong phrasing. It sets its attack to +6. So if your Snorlax is -6 and uses Belly Drum, it doesn't go to +0. It goes to +6. It's very powerful. And given that Snorlax is so tanky, it can afford to give up half its health, especially when using an item that recovers HP and supported by partners that can help keep it safe. Snorlax won the World Championships in both 2008 and 2009, which are the first 2 years of the official current competitive format. The thing is, and the reason why Snorlax is in the #1 spot is that after doing so well in Generation 4, Snorlax kind of disappeared for a while. When I started playing in Generation 5, Snorlax was not considered very good. The power level had just increased and Pokemon could do too much damage and Snorlax wasn't really able to keep up. The same was true in Generation 6. Snorlax just wasn't really a contender. Things changed for Snorlax in Generation 7 when it accidentally received a major buff. This is because they changed a bunch of items called the Fiwam berries, the Figgy, Ayapapa, Wiki, Agua, Mego berries, where these berries used to activate at a quarter 50% of your health, would give you back, I think, like an eighth of your health and might confuse you if they were in a bad mood. They changed them to now still activate at a quarter of your health remaining, but they would instead heal 50%. Basically, we started calling them super citrus berries because they were just super citrus berries. We discovered very quickly that these items were completely unbalanced and they became like a mainstay of competitive Pokemon in Sun and Moon, and Snorlax was able to benefit uniquely because of its Gluttony ability. See, I told you to get back to it, I promise. Where Gluttony basically says, hey, for those berries that activate at a quarter of your health, this Pokemon can actually eat them at 50% of their health instead. So basically, if you think about it, Snorlax could use Belly Drum, give up half of its health. Gluttony would activate the Figgy berry or whatever it was holding, and then it would heal 50% of its health, going back to 100%. It could also use Recycle to get back that berry and store it for future recovery, or if it was below 50%, just eat it immediately. Snorlax very quickly became one of the top Pokemon of Sun and Moon. And although it didn't win the World Championship that year, it did get pretty close. Plus, it did win a bunch of the other major events throughout the year, so even though it didn't win Worlds that year, it was close, and it also like dominated for the entire competitive season. The following year, we thought Snorlax would be worse because power creep, you know, was back, and Incineroar was added to the game. Thank you for that, Game Freak. And yeah, like we thought, okay, maybe Snorlax isn't as good. And then Snorlax won the World Championships for its 3rd time ever. Just like the previous years, it was still using the Belly Drum set, and yeah, it turns out a Pokemon like Snorlax with incredible stats, the ability to boost its attack to +6, and yeah, like this broken recovery system is actually pretty good. Having heard all that, having heard that Snorlax has won the World Championships 3 times, it's probably surprising to hear that it's not in the #1 slot, but here's my reasoning.
I'd do it again.
At the beginning of competitive Pokemon, and it was really good for a single generation after that, but in the other generations, it's just been not very good. In Sword and Shield, it was just really mediocre. It got a signature Gigantamax form, but it was really bad. Oh, also in
hell yeah, it was bad.
Snorlax, they nerfed it. Well, they didn't nerf it, but they nerfed the berries. The berries, like the Fiwam berries, were undoubtedly
33%.
So they changed it going into Sword and Shield so that the berries would no longer heal 50% HP, but instead a third of your HP, which is only 8% more than you get with Citrus Berry, basically making them not obsolete, but really not worth using a lot of the time. In fact, Jesus, and it looked good. I actually can't remember the last time I've even seen one. And in Scarlet and Violet, like it's been added to the game somewhat recently, but it hasn't really had any success, and it's pretty clear that it's not going to be able to keep up with the power level. I tried it myself. I think it's a cool Pokemon. I do think it's strong, but I don't think it's strong enough to keep up with just how many incredible Pokemon there are now. Snorlax is actually kind of comparable to Ursaluna regular for me in a sense, because although it, like Ursaluna regular for me, like it doesn't have the ability to go to +6 attack. Burned Facade is doing a lot of damage. It's not getting a one-hit KO, but like it's still like a kind of this like setup normal type Pokemon. But the thing is, even though it's slightly weaker than Snorlax, the bulk is similar, I would say. I think Snorlax is probably a little bit tankier, but Ursaluna has higher physical defense, so there's a case for it. And Ursaluna doesn't need to give up half its health in order to unlock its offensive potential, right? It doesn't risk, you know, having its berry knocked off or being like dealt with by a nerve and then, you know, not being able to contribute. Yeah, if Ursaluna loses the Flame Orb, then it really sucks, but you can always protect. And so it's actually pretty, if you're careful with it, it's pretty easy to consistently get the Flame Orb activated. Obviously, Ursaluna and Snorlax are very different Pokemon. I just think that in the current format, there's a Pokemon that you'd much rather use compared to Snorlax, and even that Pokemon is having some trouble right now. So basically, because Snorlax has only been good when the conditions have been right, or at the very beginning of competitive Pokemon, I'm not saying it's bad, but I don't think that it deserves the #1 slot in our list. That slot instead goes to Mega Kangaskhan. Mega Kangaskhan was by far the best Mega Evolution, period. It's funny because regular Kangaskhan is a nothing nothing burger of a Pokemon. Like, it doesn't really contribute that much. It's not thought to be very good, but Mega Kangaskhan was just insane. When it was first introduced in Pokemon X and Y, it very quickly took over the game, and the only reason it didn't win the World Championships that year was because it had such a huge target on its back. Basically, Mega Kangaskhan was like the you have to be this tall to play the game kind of bar, right? If you couldn't be Mega Kangaskhan, you couldn't really expect to do well at any tournament. So people spent the entire year developing Mega Kangaskhan counters, figuring out how to beat it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What made Mega Kangaskhan so strong? First, the ability. Mega Kangaskhan in Generation 6
Parental
had
bond,
the ability called
yeah.
Parental Bond, which was just completely broken. This was just a flat 50% damage increase on all of its moves because the little baby in the pouch would attack after Kangaskhan attacked, and it would do half as much damage as the original did. But this is actually even better than a raw 50% boost because it could KO Pokemon around Focus Sash, and it could like break a substitute with the first hit, and then the second hit would do damage after. Like, you'd hit 2 times, and yeah, like you just do so much damage. On top of that, Kangaskhan has an amazing move pool. It gets Fake Out, which normally is just used as a support move, but on Mega Kangaskhan could actually be doing a lot of damage. It got Power Up Punch, which was not designed with Mega Kangaskhan in mind, where Power Up Punch is a weak fighting type move, which gives the user an attack boost, but on Mega Kangaskhan, it would give it 2 attack boosts while also doing damage. Keep in mind, the move that normally gives you 2 attack boosts is
And the
Force Hit,
second-
which doesn't do any damage. And Power Up
And
Punch,
the
first
baby
attack boost would
hits
immediately be applied
with
to
the boost.
second attack, and so it was just doing absurd
Yeah.
amounts of damage and giving Kangaskhan a huge increase. It also got the powerful priority attack Sucker Punch, which was not only like a strong priority move on a Pokemon that was already pretty fast, it also hit the Ghost type Pokemon, which are the only Pokemon that are immune to Mega Kangaskhan, and Power Up Punch hit the Steel and Rock type Pokemon that resist normal. So it had a really nice kind of concise move pool package here that covered a lot of its own weaknesses. The stats were also great. It was like a medium speed to faster speed Pokemon with really good bulk and a really high attack stat. The stats were like kind of kittened out in a way that allowed you to be really specific with what you wanted Mega Kangaskhan to do. It could be
Holy
slow
shit.
and tanky, it could be fast and offensive, it could be like a mix
It's
of
so
things. It could be
good.
certain speed stats, it could be really strong, it could be really fast. Like, it just depended on what you wanted, and even when you didn't invest in a stat, it was still naturally high enough that Mega Kangaskhan didn't have to worry that
Yeah.
much. Like, it's not like a Pokemon where, oh, like,
Not gonna lie, it's so
bulk
true.
and all to go down super easy. Like, no, even without a lot of bulk, Mega Kangaskhan can take some pretty good attacks. It is hard to overstate how good Mega Kangaskhan was when it first released. It won the World Championships in 2015 and dominated that whole year as well, and it was one of the top Mega Evolutions in 2016, being used on the main composition called Big Six, which was Groudon, Xerneas, Smeargle, Kangaskhan, Talonflame, and Salamence, which was the main team to beat for the entire year. Mega Kangaskhan was nerfed significantly going into Sun and Moon. They took away Power Up Punch from it, they weakened the second hit from the baby to do only a quarter of the first hit rather than 50% of the first hit, and they weakened Sucker Punch's damage across the board, which of course affected Mega Kangaskhan. Despite all these nerfs, Mega Kangaskhan was still one of, if not the best Mega Evolution in Sun and Moon, which is crazy because these are pretty sizable nerfs. Like, these aren't nothing nerfs. Like, they actually matter quite a bit. Like, Kangaskhan was affected in a big way by these nerfs, and it was still probably the best Mega Evolution. Like, it's just crazy how strong it was. I think the nuttiest thing about Mega Kangaskhan is that it filled multiple roles on a team that like normally shouldn't go together. Typically, Pokemon that are
True.
offensive are like the centerpiece of a team, right? And you have all these supporting Pokemon around it. But with Mega Kangaskhan, because it got Fake Out, it was actually able to serve as both this supporting Pokemon that could support Pokemon like Xerneas or Lunala or all these other strong, powerful Pokemon, even non-restricted Pokemon, right? You could go for Fake Out in Cresselia and go for like, you know, Fake Out Trick Room or Fake Out Icy Wind, right? But it also like functioned as its own offensive Pokemon, where here's a good example. I won a regional back in 2015 with Mega Kangaskhan and Azumarill. And what I would do is I would lead them together. I'd say, okay, here's Mega Kangaskhan, here's Azumarill. And the opponent would say, oh, well, Azumarill gets Belly Drum and then I get Aqua Jet, I need to go after it. So they would often attack with both their Pokemon into Azumarill because otherwise I could go for Fake Out and Belly Drum. And then if they didn't attack Azumarill with whatever Pokemon I didn't Fake Out, then like, yeah, Azumarill would win the game, right? So they were kind of forced to attack with both Pokemon to Azumarill. And then what I would do is protect Azumarill, Mega Evolve, Power Up Punch with Kangaskhan, and then they'd have to deal with the Kangaskhan as well. Actually, that's 3 different roles.
Holy
Kangaskhan could
shit,
just go on the
that's
offensive
so
with double
fucking
damage, which would do
smart.
a ton of damage. It could support its partner with Fake Out, and with Power Up Punch in Generation 6, it could be a
That's-
sweeper on its own. Like, it could do 3 different
Okay,
distinct roles,
that's
normally which
big
you only get
bang.
one of out of a Pokemon. Anyway, it was so dominant, it was so good. I think that it's by far the best. Well, maybe not by far, because Snorlax is really good, but I think it's clearly, maybe not that clearly, because Snorlax was really good. I think that's it. That is the best normal type Pokemon of all time. And that's because, unlike Snorlax, it never had a period where it was bad. Like, even when it wasn't winning the World Championships, it was because it was like one of the main threats. It had like the biggest target on its back out of any Mega Evolution. And you know, with Pokemon, you know, Legends Z, Legends Zygarde, what is it called? Legends AZ? I don't know what it's called. With the new Legends game coming out and them confirming that Mega Evolution comes back, I don't know if it'll return to a main series game, but if they do, I'm sure that Mega Kangaskhan will dominate once again. Thanks for watching.
I'm already
This
scared.
video.
I'm
If you
scared.
did, there's
I'm scared.
actually one that I think you might like as well. It's what is the best bug type Pokemon, which bug is kind of generally agreed upon as the worst type in the game. So figuring out what the best one is was a bit of a challenge. You should check it out.
Creëer het huis van je droom.
Alright, chat, that's it for now. So, like, subscribe. Credits to Wolfie and his editor and his entire team. Videos are amazing and much props to you guys. Ciao, ciao.